All right, thanks so much for the introduction. Right, so I'm Kevin. I'm hail from the Seattle area, so I'm used to this weather, so it's nice to be in a familiar place. A little bit about me. Previously, before I started working on Project Robius, which I'll get into in a moment, I was an OS guy for the last decade or so, working on a Rust OS. And I'm not a UI person, so I just want to say if you witness any UI crimes committed here, please understand that I'm just getting started with the UI world. So anyway, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about a very new project we have called Robrix, which is a multi-platform Rust app for Matrix chat and more things in the future, but currently just a Matrix client. So the main idea behind Robrix is we want to have a single code base, purely in Rust, and all of the entire system stack also in Rust, and it works seamlessly and immersively across many different platforms. So here I have screenshots from a bunch of different platforms, iOS, Android, Windows, Linux, in this case, I think it's Ubuntu, and a bunch of different things, and Mac OS, of course, right? So, like I said, this is getting started, so it's not the most beautiful UI just yet, but this is proof that right off the bat, it works across many different platforms without me, the app developer, having to do a whole lot of work to make that happen. So, let me back up a little bit, tell you a little bit about the motivation behind this project. So the parent project here is called Project Robius, which is generally our goal to bring a good multi-platform app dev experience to Rust, where every component is fully written in Rust. So of course, if you're familiar with Rust, you know the benefits therein. You get that nice, robust, safe, and performant ecosystem with a great community and a great selection of crates on crates.io and others. The developer won't have to deal with writing platform-specific code or integrating multiple different languages or environments together. And then, of course, as a secondary point here, we want to make mobile a sort of first-class concern, promote it to that status in the Rust community, because previously, if you've worked on Rust in the mobile space, you know that it's a little bit neglected. So it doesn't really feel like a first-class member, first-class target for Rust. So this project is fully open source. We are decentralized across most of the globe, and it's community-driven. We have a lot of different kind of constituent community projects in the Project Robius umbrella. So MakePad, a UI kit, Dioxys, another UI kit. A bunch of folks are working in build systems, currently in the room over. We have more talks about that in the app and web session. And I guess the unifying thing here is that everything is written in Rust. So why? Why do we need this? If you're familiar with the state of Rust GUI, you'll know that there are just loads and loads of UI toolkits out there. Here's just a small selection of some. For this particular project, I'm using MakePad. But this is just UI, so there's a whole lot more to developing an immersive app that takes advantage of all the platforms underlying, like sensor access and talking to platform APIs and OS services, beyond just actually drawing your nice little widgets in your text. So that's kind of what Project Robius is there to bring together, not just the UI, but all of the things you need to create an immersive app that seamlessly works across multiple platforms. By comparison, I think a lot of existing Rust apps, kind of like commercial quality ones, for example, Signal, the secure messenger app, they have less Rust and more other code. So Signal still does have a decent amount of Rust. It's sort of like the core of the business logic, but all of the the actual UI stuff is just a wrapper around that written in their platform-specific language, as expected. So more specifically, why this app? Why Robrix? Well, in beginning this Robius project a few months ago, we needed a key application to drive the development of the features within Robius. So we were thinking to ourselves, what sort of app requires a lot of platform functionality? And we said, a Matrix client actually requires a decent amount of functionality. So here's just a short list of some things that you may want to use from the underlying platform. And there are many, many more, especially when you get into things like video chatting. All right. And then we said, okay, well, we'll develop a nice little Matrix client here just to prove that Project Robius and the UI toolkits therein kind of give you a fully fledged app dev experience, and you can do anything you want. But we could actually go a little bit further with this Robrix app itself. So we're thinking something along the lines of making it sort of a central hub for using federated services, with a primary focus being users like ourselves here, open source developers, where we can integrate a whole bunch of other features just beyond Matrix. Obviously ActivityPub too, but some local AI large language models, and maybe source code views, and other things that open source developers use a lot of. So I won't talk too much more about Robius itself. I'm giving a talk at Rust and L on Wednesday at 10 a.m. where I will talk more specifically about that. But I will give you a little bit of an overview of some of the selected goals and our roadmap for this project, this app, Robrix, in the next couple of slides. So the main thing that we want to do is sort of create like a reference design of a full system stack for how a Robius app might look. So this is kind of a loose, high-level view here. You have the UI toolkit, which should be interchangeable depending on what app, what your experience is as a front-end developer, what you like using. Do you like using more native toolkits like MakePad? Do you like sort of a React-style front-end like Dioxys or something, running on a web engine? You can choose. Then we provide a series of platform abstractions, again, all in Rust, that allows you to talk to the underlying platform and use those very valuable OS services, dealing with things like concurrency, which I'll get into a little bit later on in the talk, and then encapsulating all of your nice little application logic with widgets, some of which provided by the UI toolkit, and other sort of like libraries that make this whole thing easier. So, okay, that was a slow transition. This is kind of an overview of what the app looks like. Not all of this has been implemented, but this is mostly implemented and partially planned. The idea here is we try to brainstorm exactly what we would need to drive the feature development of Project Robius. So for example, if I need to open a URL across 5 different platforms, that's something that obviously we need from a Matrix chat client. So that's something that we worked on first. This is kind of like the relationship between this app and Robius at large. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But taking another step back, some meta goals for Robrix as an example of a cool Robius app would be that we want it to be well-structured and well-commented. Of course, I think that goes without saying. But the point is there that we want it to be able to serve as sort of an example that someone can fork and modify, and then understand all the different parts of Robius and how we integrate those alongside the UI toolkit and how you would build a complex app. So this is actually the first very, I wouldn't say overly complex, but like the first app that has real business logic that we've used MakePad for, which is the UI toolkit. So a lot of our effort has been spent to, contribute features back to MakePad. And we want to allow other folks to do the same, using this to serve as a model for that. To that end, we want to publish a detailed walkthrough, which I plan to get out this summer, that guides you through creating an application like Robrix, and basically just to prove that this framework works and you can actually create an application that is usable. So our roadmap for this, currently we're in stage 1, which is not yet complete, but our goal here is just to publish an app with basic Matrix client features, all the stuff you'd expect, standard messaging, login, app persistence. We have some of this already working, but as a solo dev who's also working on all the underlying platform and UI layers, I can only get so far in a few months. But basically this will continue to drive our effort to build out the rest of the app dev ecosystem and flesh out those UI toolkits, in this case specifically MakePad. Then for stage 2, which would be later this year, we'll add some of those like non-crucial, more administrative features that most Matrix clients already support, like creating rooms, doing admin actions, things like that. We also want to improve the UI. So as I mentioned, I'm not a UI person, so we've had some help from a few designers to improve that. And we want to have sort of a side-by-side multi-room view. And then potentially with some cool LLM and AI features in there as well, which I'll talk about later. And then stage 3 would be integrating more services beyond just Matrix. So that'll be towards the end of the talk. That'd be sometime starting early next year. All right, so stage 1, currently where we're at. So right now we have the basics. It works. You can log in, you can get a rooms list. Currently we're only using sliding sync, which is pretty cool. I think we might be like the 3rd, maybe 4th user of the new Matrix REST SDK and its support for sliding sync. We have basic messaging support, annotations, although MakePad doesn't yet support emoji, so as you'll see in my demos, those are just plain text. We spent a lot of time working on rich text formatting for the underlying UI toolkit and a variety of other things. Our goal is also to publish these to app stores, which has historically been difficult for Rust apps. Some of my colleagues are working on sort of the build toolchain, and in the app and web session next door, there's some talks about that later today, about how we can sign, bundle, package, and distribute these applications using, again, Rust wrappers, and not having to deal too much with the underlying intricacies of something like Xcode in the App Store. So far with that, we've already been able to publish this to test flight, so that's working. That's iOS's demo sort of beta testing distributor. We do have complete platform support. That's something I worked on a few months ago, which means that you can build every platform. You can build this app targeting every platform on every other platform, insofar as they're natively supported. So you can't build iOS on Windows, but every other combination works. And then we have an issue tracker. This I just grabbed from the GitHub main README. So a lot of things left to do. This is slightly out of date, but yeah, that's where we are. Some things I'm explicitly not working on just yet are these, administrative or auxiliary features, because they're not something that drive the features, the feature development of Project Robius, because most of this is just UI stuff. I do want to talk a little bit about some significant implementation challenges we've had in the project at large. This is less specific to the app, but more specific to developing a Rust app dev toolkit. So one major thing, obviously, is how to expose and properly abstract all of the platform APIs and native OS services. Right now, I'm just looking at local things, right? So this is not something like a Maps API. This would be something like, give me your current location that is local to the device or something. I also want to handle multi-step builds. I already alluded to a little bit of that in the discussion of signing, packaging, and bundling. But this is a whole complex topic in and of itself. I'll talk more about this on Wednesday. All right, I said that already. So the real challenge here is that all of these things have to happen across wildly disparate platforms, and we want to make the experience for the front-end Rust user, the developer, as consistent as possible. There are some other things that we've run into, specifically dealing with different forms of concurrency. Like you have a UI main thread, you have a series of background threads that maybe just run synchronous, non-async workloads, and then you have, most SDKs export an async function interface in Rust, so we need to support running async workloads as well, things like this. I'll give more examples later. And then, of course, as I said, we wanted to support multiple different UI toolkits. So this particular project has been implemented on top of MakePad, but it would be nice to also be able to implement something like this on top of Dioxys or Leptos or anything else and use all of these other platform abstractions. Speaking of, here are some of those. Now, this is quite a grand venture. There's a lot of work to be done here. But just to give you a hint where we're currently at, we're just getting started. So this is basically what we've begun work on in orange, what we finished work on in green, and what we have yet to start that's not highlighted. So yeah, a lot of different things to do. I plan to publish some of these crates such that you can use them from crates.io, and you won't be tied to using Project Robius or tied to using MakePad specifically. The idea is they'll work with any UI toolkit. So this is a big app dev kind of collaborative work that myself and many others are working on. For the platforms that we're targeting, it's just the main ones that you expect on desktop, macOS, Linux, Windows, on mobile, Android, and iOS. In the future, we want to target OpenHarmony as soon as we can get our hands on some of those dev boards, which should actually happen this week. MakePad itself and Project Robius wants to target web by compiling to GOSIM. I haven't actually done that for Project Robrix, for the Robrix app just yet. But then we also may consider some other more esoteric platforms like microcontrollers in the future. But for now, green is what our kind of like our tier 1 support, orange is tier 2, and red is TBD later. So let me give you a quick demo of stage 1. So can we see that? Oh. What's going on here? Oh, I think I need to exit the presentation. There we go. Okay. Missed it. Okay, good. Yeah, so this is the Robrix view. Nothing, I'm already in a room. But nothing too fancy at the moment, but again, this is all done from scratch in Rust, so it's quite a lot of work to get to this point. It's very fast, performance is great. This, I think, is mostly due to MakePad itself being a UI toolkit that really works hard to minimize compilation times and be as close to the native interfaces as possible with the bare minimum of overhead inserted by the Rust layer. But I mean, we have support for basic stuff. Like I was saying, the emoji not yet visible, so I'm using a text representation. You know, I can resize it. I can move it. You know, it doesn't do much to just yet, but that's kind of where we're at here. Wow, that was weird. But yeah, it's nice and quick. So this is where we're at. This is the can do some image scaling better. This is the macOS native client, which I've built and run on this machine. But we also have the same thing running on Android. So this is, can you see that? Yeah. This is the Android emulator, and it's the same sort of thing. Sorry, the text is really poorly, is that okay here? Okay. Well, anyway, if you'll trust me, it's the same thing. It works nicely. I don't know why the text is so poor. I guess it's a scaling issue on Android emulator, Android Studio, but yeah, same problem, same results rather. So, yep, here you go. And from an app dev point of view, me being the Robrix developer, nothing I did here is any different than across Android, iOS, Windows, Linux, or macOS. It's all the same code base, and there's not a single line of platform-specific code. Okay, so, right. So that's where we're at. I've worked over the past 5 or 6 months, I think, to get there. Of course, a lot of that has been spent shoring up Mapepad and implementing various build tooling and a lot of the framework stuff beneath this. But hopefully development will go faster in the coming months. Just to highlight one thing, so Makepad and the Robius stack isn't as efficient as it could be, but it is fairly efficient. So you can see we're using about 160, 170 megabytes from the application itself. About a third of this is fonts, and another third is the triple frame buffers for this particular system. Compared to an Electron app, like the traditional Element, it's using a lot less memory. I would hazard a guess that this is probably quite similar to how Element X currently behaves, although I don't have numbers there. But a lot of our philosophy here is to make it as native as possible, even though it's Rust. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that using pure Rust doesn't, inflate the app size or anything, because I know a lot of folks have the idea that Rust has a slow, heavyweight compiler, and projects can bring in thousands and thousands of dependencies. But in general, the actual runtime usage of memory is, what you would expect. So if you back out this stuff, you're looking at, 50 to 60 megabytes of actual use. And this is with heavy caching of drawn widgets and things like that, with no effort to reduce that. In the future, of course, we'll need to do that. The other cool thing about this is with Makepad, and again, I can't take credit for this, for the UI toolkit itself, you can do a clean build in around 8 to 10 seconds, even on an M1 Mac like this. So that makes that plus live development, where you can live design and see that change reflect automatically without recompiling, makes development of an app like this pretty nice. Okay, so I'll highlight just a couple of systems challenges that I've been dealing with lately. And I don't think these are particularly unique, but being a relatively new app dev framework, it's something that we have to contend with. And the fact that we're developing a matrix chat client kind of revealed some of these problems that we didn't previously think we would have to deal with, or didn't think they would be as, I think, complex to deal with. So one of them is what I'd call like mixed forms of concurrency. So this is I don't know if you can see the code, but this is a heavily simplified snippet of how we're using the Matrix Rust SDK, specifically the UI higher level crate, to get access to a particular message. So in this case, the top 2 lines are Makepad code. I don't know if you can see my cursor here. No. Top 2 lines are Makepad code, Makepad-specific callbacks for drawing a particular item. This would be like drawing a single message in a timeline, a single event. So in this case, this is an example of how we would fetch and draw an image. In a first attempt, you might just call this, and if you're not like an expert Rust developer, or if you're not familiar with kind of like the breakdown between main threads, background threads, UI stuff, like a lot of other cross-platform app dev toolkits don't really force you to deal with this necessarily. You might make a mistake like, this, where you attempt to call an async function and await on that result, or wait on that future in a non-async context. So this will give you a compiler error, so that's nice, thanks Rust. And then you might say, okay, well, I can get around that by wrapping it in a async block and then spawning that future onto an async task, right? So this works. You get past the compile error, but then you get to a runtime error where you've realized that, for example, I'm running this on the main UI thread because this is drawing logic, right? You run into the error where you don't actually have an async runtime attached to this thread, right? So you might say, okay, well, what if I want to just attach a background async thread? What if I want to attach this UI main thread to an async runtime, like Tokyo in this case, right? You can do that, but generally we don't want to block the main UI thread. I think this is known for everybody. Invoking a blocking synchronous function from the main thread will obviously hang the UI, especially if it causes a system call, in which case the OS could put the thread to sleep. So that's a no-no. But it's also maybe slightly less obvious that you don't want to do that for async functions either, right? So even if the async function runs and you think of it as being relatively quick, the actual OS native thread, right, which again, MakePad and most of these UI toolkits don't use async natively, right? So they're going to still be expecting that thread to run fully and for them to have full control over it. That async thread, that UI thread could still be blocked while the executor is pulling all the futures that have been awaited, right? And you can actually have the same problem on background threads, background native OS threads, but that's not an issue because they're in the background. So one of the key points here that we, I think, learned rather early on in the project is that we need to enforce that async is not used on the main thread, even if you consider it to be non-blocking, and we need to relegate that to other threads. However, while you may consider this to be relatively straightforward, the implementation to actually realize this is not straightforward, and it adds a lot of complexity from the perspective of the app dev. So here's one current solution that we're working with. Basically, we have a series of requests that are made from the UI thread to other threads. And right now it's relatively manual, but the idea here is we would access from a media cache in shared memory. We could call this very fast non-blocking function that would just return immediately, right, if the media has already been loaded, or if it's been requested, or if it failed. So this doesn't do any blocking, it doesn't run any async functions. Those are offloaded to other threads. So this is what that function looks like in a very simplified manner on the left. Basically, you insert a placeholder into the media cache. Once and then that request is forwarded to a different thread via a channel. And that particular thread, in this case, because it's an async request, needs to be attached to an async executor, like a Tokyo runtime. And it effectively does this, right? So we have an enum, which we have a variant for this particular type of request, which fetches the media. And then somewhere off on a background thread, we have an async worker that effectively loops over all of these async requests that the UI thread or other background threads have made and runs them. So, this is a very common pattern that we'll see a lot. So one thing that we intend to do soon is to kind of work on encapsulating this and making it a little bit easier to specify this. Because the way it is right now, although we use this for a bunch of different other features, it's still quite manual. So I can give you sort of a high-level view of exactly how this works currently. So like I said, we have two, if you think of them as like categories or classes of threads, we have the main UI thread, which is where the draw routines and the event handlers run. We have the background thread, which can call synchronous platform APIs and perhaps also synchronous functions from whatever SDK you're using. In this case, it's Matrix. And then we have a series of background threads that have been attached to an async runtime. And those are the ones that do the bulk of the work, but you still need some way to communicate. So we have a bunch of different types of unidirectional and bidirectional channels to deal with this. So I don't necessarily need to go into the details here, but this is something that we really don't want a first-time app dev to have to contend with. This is a lot of complexity in and around concurrency, just to make sure that we don't have any sort of UI blockages or weird blocking problems that results in an unresponsive UI. So anyway, so just to wrap up this stage and to look forward a little bit, this is, again, a relatively new project. We've spent quite a lot of our time collaborating with MakePad and other UI toolkits and contributing back improvements there. We intend to continue developing these key features. The platform abstraction crates is something that I'm working on personally, also publishing these apps to the app stores or package managers like on Linux, and then more documentation. Everybody always needs more documentation. Now let's get to the more exciting stuff here, which is the future stages beyond just Matrix. So stage 2 is about expanding the implementation of Robrix itself to hopefully achieve feature parity or rough feature parity with existing Matrix clients like Element and Element X. One thing that we'd like to do is have a more responsive UI that can have maybe like an IDE style of dockable tabs and side-by-side panes so you can see multiple rooms. I'll show a visual mock-up of that in a second. And as like a weird person who likes foldables, I had a Surface Duo and now I have a OnePlus Open. I really want to create an app that better utilizes those that extra screen space on mobile. And then I'll also talk a little bit about a kind of a unique vision to integrate with local large language models to leverage some of the benefits of AI without jeopardizing things that Matrix is very clear on, preserving data sovereignty and end-to-end encryption. So this stage will also include some of these administrative aux features that I haven't dealt with. But yeah, so we have some UI mockups from a designer that we're working with. Oh, okay, there we go. Where this would kind of be the main view, nothing too revolutionary here. But then you can open up multiple different rooms and multiple tabs, move them around, undock and dock them. MakePad has a dock widget for this, so this is relatively achievable in the short term. Right, so I don't think there's anything too revolutionary here, so I'll move on. And then one thing that we want to do is bring in AI features to a limited extent. I don't want to overly emphasize AI here, but I think that it could offer some really cool new features. So if you've used Discord lately, you might have seen this sort of notification pop up where it says, hey, some of your friends are chatting about this particular topic. So this is like a chat topic summary or a conversation synopsis. And you can also get like highlights of all the threads that are happening for a particular Matrix client. I'm sorry, a particular Discord room. So it would be nice, in my opinion, to have these for Matrix chats, but how do you do that without, if you were to use something like ChatGPT, you're not going to want to upload your entire chat history to that. So the answer here is to run these models locally. That allows you to benefit from AI without jeopardizing the end-to-end encryption or the ownership over your data. So I can imagine a few different categories of features here, things like, hey, what's happening? You ask the large language model to summarize the last 2 days of activity on a particular room, right? Or you just got back from a 2-week vacation and you want to know what you missed without scrolling through 30,000 messages, right? This is something that I'm sure we've all dealt with, right? And then if you have like a large open source project, like you're maintaining a big project and you don't want to have to deal with a lot of repetitive questions, or you want to free yourself up, we could see some integration here where you have sort of a chatbot that automatically handles frequently asked questions in a public way such that people can reuse those answers. Longer term, we also envision that you could use Matrix to share the way that you're customizing and hacking or using these various large language models. And this doesn't currently exist if you use something like ChatGPT or one of the kind of enterprise managed versions of this. So that would be cool too. Here's an example of what this could look like for integrating an LLM into the Robrix chat. So you can see I've chosen a model and I'm asking that large language model, hey, what happened in this channel over the last couple of days? And of course, we don't need, because that particular room is not end-to-end encrypted, but if it was, you could also provide that context into the model. So we have another project, our organization has another project called Moxin, I'm not sure how we're pronouncing that yet, but basically it allows you to, kind of like LM Studio, it allows you to browse and locally run these LLMs on your own machine, and it's cross-platform just like this, so it would be relatively easy to, not easy, but straightforward to integrate this into Robrix. And then moving on to stage 3, which is slated for beginning next year. Beyond just chat, we want to integrate a variety of other features that are related, other federated services, right? So microblogs like Mastodon, community forums like Lemmy, code review like GitLab or something. Notes, not sure if there are any federated alternatives there, but something like Obsidian. News feeds, and then of course it would be nice to have sort of a centralized activity pane for all of your notifications. So I pasted here Teams screenshot, but I like this one thing about Teams, even though I know it's not federated. So the idea would be to collect all of these different things into a single app and give you sort of an easier way to experience all of these different federated services. And there's some unique potential for some pretty powerful combination features. For example, let's say that you're maintaining a large open source community, a large open source project, and you want to inform your community that a new release has occurred, right? So you could potentially create a workflow in the future Robrix app that would allow you to publish a release to GitLab and then post tweets or toots, as Mastodon calls them, use an ActivityPub to your community, or your social community, your public community. And then potentially even collect like some sort of financial kudos, like a support, like Patreon-style support, or like a micropayment, that says, "Hey, thanks for your hard work." To do something like that, we intend to work with the Open Wallet Foundation project for some more advanced identity management. This is a very new development, but the idea would be to use this as a single identity provider across all of these things, which Robrix would manage. And that would make it a little bit easier to disseminate and deal with IDs here. I'm not sure how we'll incorporate this with something like OIDC, but I think there's room for easy collaboration there. And then, yeah, of course, you can use this also as your main wallet provider to deal with transactions. So there's a lot of other service categories in the world of the Fediverse. I won't really talk about them, but there are some others we've considered. But the example here is just to start with the simple ones, like ActivityPub, Mastodon, and other things that don't require significant UI development. So for these kind of services, this would be basically an entirely different app, which we will potentially explore with something like a mini app within a larger app in the style of WeChat. But for now, that's a little bit too far out to speculate on. So yeah, in summary, for the future of Robrix, we hope that it will make it a little bit easier to use and discover the Fediverse. As someone who is relatively new to the Fediverse, like in the last year or so, I can empathize with the difficulty of setting up and understanding the terminology compared to something like Discord or Meta services, where it's just provided for you and it's limited. Apple's kind of walled garden approach is another popular alternative. So I think hopefully we can make it as smooth to use multiple federated services and to provide the potential for combo actions there. So the QR-based login that Matthew showed earlier, I think, is an awesome example of one way that Matrix is already doing this. So we plan to leverage that and build on the rest of the success for other ActivityPub sources too. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to acknowledge some folks who have done a lot of great work here. So on the left in black and white, the MakePad team, that's the UI toolkit that Robrix uses. And then on the right, some other folks working on MakePad and other parts of this project, and there are many others not pictured, but they're the ones who have made some of this work possible. So with that, I'm more than happy to take any questions. We're always looking for help. Project Robius is pretty new. Here's a link to our GitHub page. You can talk to me on these various platforms, and of course we have a Matrix room as well. That's actually our space for the project at large. It's not so active yet, but we're hoping to improve it in the future. So thanks very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm sure you're going to have questions.
This is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for using Matrix as I guess, the guinea pig for the app framework. I was really interested in the concurrency problems that you hit.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that was actually our fault on Matrix Rust SDK for providing async APIs which do block, and rather than you having to do all of this complicated stuff to go and have a kind of background thread pool to make up for the SDK blocking, perhaps our SDK shouldn't block in the first place?
That's a great question. So I would say yes and no, right? Yes, that was the immediate need of using alternative concurrency models and the mix of all these channels. But if it wasn't Matrix, it would be the next SDK, right? So everybody uses async. It's very popular, so of course we want to support that. I actually did a survey of a bunch of different UI toolkits around a year ago to see how they used async, to what degree they integrated with it, and the answer surprised me. It was basically none. So I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between the UI toolkits that want full control over the threading and they don't want to deal with async and being forced to bring in a huge dependency like Tokyo. So there's that, and then the group of folks who are creating these nice SDKs like yourself and making it easy for Rust developers to call and access these things. We need some sort of integrated solution to bridge the gap there. So yeah, to answer your question, no, I don't think that Matrix is particularly to blame or guilty there. Of course, it's the particular instance that forced us to consider this problem. But if it wasn't Matrix, the next SDK that we used, or the next SDK that any app dev wishes to use, would most likely present the same problem. So it just kind of forced us to reconcile with that issue earlier rather than later.
Thanks.
But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think the origin of this project is to demonstrate the viability of the Robius framework.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the motivation is a little bit different from the element standpoint. So it's like a demo thing but that will grow down the road.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Do you actually use Robrix yourself for communicating in the Matrix chat?
Do I dog food it, you mean?
Yeah. Or do you use Elements or something else?
Yes and no. Yeah. So I use Element just because the features, as you saw on that feature tracker, we don't have a lot of things supported. I think it's almost ready to dog food. Like in the next month, I think we can switch to it. And we also plan to hopefully move a lot of our discussions off of Discord into actual Matrix rooms, which I've set up, but remain mostly silent, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, I can use it. You can send messages. I didn't demo that, but you can use it, but you can't do anything more complicated. And because of a lot of the issues that we faced with things like app bundling and signing, which you need to get things like system notifications to display properly on macOS and iOS, a lot of our time has been spent digging into the platform plumbing before getting to implement the actual features. So whereas it might take you, 2 days to implement notifications on, Swift UI or Android in a fully featured way, it takes us 2 months because we got to, implement it for all of the underlying platforms. Then we actually implement the app level logic. So yeah, not using it yet, but if you want to give it a try, you're more than welcome to file bug reports or make contributions.
Following on from that question, what's the one thing that's stopping you from currently dog fooding it?
The one thing that's currently stopping me?
Yeah.
Oh.
Or the two things, or the however many. Yeah.
Well, so for me, notifications is a big deal breaker. I also haven't done a lot of, because of the aforementioned issues, I haven't dealt a lot with app persistence. That's actually something that is a little bit more complicated than I'd expected because of all the wrenches thrown in by dealing with the underlying platforms. So I mean, obviously on desktop it's very easy to get access to storage, but on Android, iOS, a little bit different, right? If you want to do it the right way and in such a way that can be published to an app store, you have to abide by all these rules. So yeah, I mean, having to log in and pull down the whole state every time, that's pretty bad, right? So that's going to be something that I work on pretty soon. But the features at this point were just designed to, one, stress test MakePad as a UI project a little bit, get it more usable with different widget composition and theming, which it didn't previously have in a friendly to use way. So Rick from the MakePad team has been instrumental, and I've given him a lot of tasks, please do this, please make this easier. For example, rich text formatting didn't exist in MakePad at all, a month ago. And we spent, 4 to 6 weeks working on that. So that's basically a full HTML and also Markdown parser for that LLM chat project. But yeah, notifications are one thing, inline replies, the ability to properly display emoji is something that we still need to support from this particular UI toolkit. So the reasons are many, but many of them can be solved, I think, relatively quickly. It's just that we haven't prioritized those.
So the point is to make it productized. That means need more help in the community.
Yeah.
That's what you are trying to to get to. Yeah.
I don't disagree.
So you mentioned that you are targeting Linux, Debian specifically, or Ubuntu.
Currently.
And I was going to ask which desktop environment specifically you target. So which kind of style your application will target, like GNOME or KDE. But then I tried running your app myself, and I noticed that it's fully custom, right?
Yeah, right. So this is maybe my fault for not introducing MakePad a little bit more. But yeah, that is a fully custom UI toolkit that has super thin wrappers around all of the native platform stuff, and it works differently on Windows versus Linux versus Mac OS with a Rust higher level abstraction that provides you, this nice, what will be nice, app dev environment for defining your UI and handling actions and events therein. So no, it's not something like it only works on GTK or Qt. It doesn't use that at all. Right?
But are there any plans to bring look and feel closer to the operating system?
Yeah. Okay. I see. Yeah. Sorry, I may have misunderstood. So for some things, right, like displaying a context menu, right, we use the platform native way of doing that, right? So like if you right-click or like a tooltip. For other things, so like currently, here I can show. So like this, right? If you look at this, it's not showing. My bad. Right. So if you look at this at the bottom, like this text input field, right? Currently, this is custom. This is MakePad's platform agnostic, higher level reimplementation of a basic input method editor. But on mobile, it's hard to integrate all the features that you want that are typically provided by IMEs, like selection, copy and paste. So like we have some of this stuff, right? But it's ad hoc. It's for MakePad specifically. So one thing we want to do with sort of as like an ongoing future collaboration with folks from the line vendor team, we do want to work on Android native, iOS native, Mac OS native IME methods so that we can directly use those instead of having our own text input widget. So like all of this stuff, displaying text, images, that's done by the UI toolkit in a non-platform native way. Of course, I mean, it still uses like the windowing and all that sort of APIs. But for things like context menus and IMEs, and I'm sure I can think of some others if I spent 10 minutes on it, we want to just drill directly down into the native layer and allow them to handle it. It's basically just us avoiding re-implementing hundreds of very complex things like IMEs across 10 platforms. Don't want to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if you saw the Matrix Rust WYSIWYG editor the Element X uses.
I haven't.
But I think it might do the vast majority of what you need there, in that it is a native Rust abstraction over the native IMEs, and it's what Element Web and Element X iOS and Android use. The only slight catch is that it's really hard to get right. Yeah. We had a team of about 8 people working on it for about 2 years, and it's still not perfect. The problem being that the native platforms move surprisingly rapidly, including on minor releases on Android and that sort of thing. And so we found that a new version of Android will come out and suddenly everything will break, likewise on iOS.
Oh,
but
interesting.
we need people to maintain that. We're not really maintaining it at the moment. And in fact, we're starting to back it out on Element X because we don't have the bandwidth. So if you have people interested in solving it, it may be something that you could pick up and use, and then we can benefit from too.
Definitely, yeah. So I didn't talk about that. I will look into that. Part of Project Robius is to assess what already exists out there. Like the Towery project has done a lot of work on desktop, right? So for example, they have, I think, a credit called Muda, menu bar desktop something, right? So for that, we can just use it directly, right? We don't need to re-implement everything just for the sake of doing it for a new project. So it sounds like that may also be a good candidate. So in the spirit of transparency, I have not deeply dove into IMEs just yet. That was one example. But before we do, we'll be certain to check out that project.
Basically, don't make the same mistake that we did, thinking, how can it be to have an abstraction over all the IMEs? And it goes wrong. The other thing is that an SSO tool or widget would be so useful, not just for Matrix clients, but in terms of abstracting across all the different platforms in a native Rust thing, would be really, really good. So don't push it off too far.
I think you and I and Rick should chat because I think he's also interested in working on that. I have not dealt with it. The only thing I did recently was deal with, suffer from the difficulty of like on Windows and Mac compiling, cross-compiling, and depending on the native SSL, like even like with the OpenSSL Rust crate. Ran into a lot of problems with that, fixed our build tool chain to support it, and then realized that Matrix, like many other SDKs, allows you to specify a feature flag to include the pure Rust version, rust-ls. So yeah, don't need to deal with that anymore. But in the future, an arbitrary app dev could wish to depend on arbitrary native libraries. So we still do need to support it a little bit. So that may be related. I don't know exactly. But so what did you have in mind specifically for
So I was thinking
SSL
on,
issues?
sorry, on SSO rather
SSO.
than
Oh,
yeah.
SSO.
So
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was one of the bullets that you'd pushed back and said, hey,
Yes,
in phase
yes,
2 we'll do
yes.
SSO. I'm just thinking a really high leverage thing for any of the entities that you're putting together to just provide an app framework layer SSO iframe thing would be really useful.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that will pan out. I think a lot of the time we'll just open up a link, right? You know, go to the browser. So you're talking about like
doing
creating
it
some kind of, okay.
Like embed it, if there was a way to embed it natively into the app so it feels like a native experience rather than the horrible sling the user to Safari or whatever and hope that they come back. Would be
that
a real value add the Robius could add.
Interesting. If we do that, that would be a further stage. But I definitely hear what you're saying about the kicking them to the web not being great, a web engine, web browser. Yeah, we can talk more about that.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing with us that impressive open source project.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And